This tutorial is going to show you how to create more of a painting styled image with your tablet. Starting out, it works the best with a colored image, but black and white will work as well. So starting out, I'm going to have this image that's in color, and I'm going to create a new layer. So in the bottom right hand corner, I'm going to go to New Layer, so you'll see that I have this new layer added now. And what I'm going to be working with is two different tools. I'm going to be using the Eyedropper Tool along with the Paintbrush tool, and those are found on the left over here. This is where the Eyedropper Tool is, and this is where the Brush Tool is. We're going to be switching back and forth between these a lot, so it's really good to know the shortcut. The Eyedropper Tool will show up if you hit I on your keyboard, so now I have the Eyedropper Tool that shows up. If you hit B on your keyboard, the Paintbrush tool will show up. So you can switch between, again, I for the eyedropper and B for the paintbrush. So starting out, I'm going to use my paintbrush, so hit B on your keyboard if you don't have that up yet. And a couple of different settings I would play around with. First of all, the paintbrush setting. I would choose more of a softer brush. You could also choose a different brush as well. These will all create different effects for what we're going to be doing. So as you're working, try out some different paintbrushes, see what style you like the best. I'm just going to use a regular one for now. And then I would make sure that your mode is set to normal and your opacity is up at 100% for now. Using my paintbrush tool, I'm going to switch over now to my eyedropper tool, and this is going to allow me to select a color from my face or from my image. So I'm going to hit I on the keyboard, and I'm going to start with the cheek. So I'm going to click in an area that I want to start with, so right here, and you'll notice that when I click, it's selecting a color from the face. You can see in the eye here the different colors in the eye, and then as I move along the skin, it changes value or changes color for me. So I'm going to choose this color of the cheek here that's a little bit darker, and then I'm going to switch to my paintbrush tool. So I'm going to hit B on the keyboard, and it gives me my brush, and I'm just going to start filling this area in a little bit. So you'll notice that it does blend in quite well until I get to areas that are more of the highlight on the cheek, or even more of that darker shadow underneath here. So I'm going to stop and just keep switching back and forth and choosing more colors of the skin. So I'm going to hit the I again for the eyedropper tool, and then back to B for the brush, and I'm just going to continuously go back and forth and choose these different values from the face and start filling it in and just kind of going over top of my image. So again, I for the eyedropper tool and then B for the brush, and I'm just going to keep going back and forth for a while and filling in more and more. Using my tablet with the pen, I'm trying to move my brush up and down to create an interesting kind of texture pattern. So you can see some of these brush strokes on the cheeks where the colors start to mix in a little bit, and that will make your image look a little bit more interesting. Something else that I'll show you in a minute is the smudge tool and smudging together these lines, so it is a little bit more smooth in areas if you would like to try that instead. But again, this creates an interesting texture similar to a painting, so definitely keep practicing, continuing to go around a bit. When you come to an area such as the eye that's a little bit more detailed, if you hit Command plus on your keyboard, you can zoom in to pick up those more detailed areas. So I'm going to go to my eyedropper tool here, select a color of the eye, and then hit B for my brush. And you'll notice that my brush is almost the size here of the iris, so I'm going to change my brush size and make that a little bit smaller so I can be even more detailed as I'm filling in the eye. And I'm just going to start to fill in that color, again clicking I and then B to switch between my brush and the eyedropper tool. Then I'm going to zoom back out and continue to fill in areas underneath the eye. So I'm going to make my brush a little bit bigger now. I'm going to pause my recording and fill in some more so you can see more progress, and then in a minute we're going to come back and work with a little bit of the smudge tool and starting to smudge the lines a little bit, and then later we'll look at adding some more refined edges and details. Okay, so here's the image with just quickly a little bit more added, so you can see that There's some layers of color in the hair and a little bit more around the face. The technique with seeing the brush strokes definitely is different and something that looks interesting, being able to see these lines. But if you wanted to try using the Smudge tool to start to smudge and blend some of these colors a little bit more, that would be something interesting to experiment with. The Smudge tool is found on the left over here, so you can see where that is right by this little finger that's pointing. And there's a couple settings at the top that you can play around with. First of all is the strength, so I would set it to maybe around 50%. And then I'm going to choose one of the brushes that has that feathered edge. So I'm going to leave it at what it was selected with, and I'm going to use a smaller size here. And I'm just going to start to choose areas that I want to blend together. And really lightly, I'm just going to go back and forth over it a couple times. Sometimes the Smudge tool, if you use it too much, like go up and down with your brush too much here, it's going to take a while to load. So definitely just smudging it a little bit here will start to blend some of those lines and fade them together. So you can experiment more with the strength if it doesn't look like it's blending it in enough. And I'm just, again, moving my paintbrush really quickly back and forth, and you can see how that starts to fade that value into the skin a little bit more. So you create more of that painterly effect. So play around with that a little bit. If you didn't get a chance to use different styles of paintbrushes yet, I would definitely experiment with that now. So again, that's on the left over here. When you have your paintbrush selected, you're able to come to the top and choose different brushes to experiment with. So I'm going to select my paintbrush here and try one of these. Maybe this one here, make my brush size a little bit bigger. So you can see when I'm painting with my brush, it's creating a different effect compared to some of these lines that are a little bit thinner. So you can see how this would look if I used this to paint on the face. So I would definitely experiment with different styles of brushes. The other thing I want to talk about with this that you can do is use more of a dark color. So maybe I'll even pick black for right now. I'm going to go back to the paintbrush that I was using before. So I'm going to choose that smaller brush, make the size really tiny. Something you can experiment with is a mixture of this more realistic kind of painterly style versus combining the graphic style. So even going around certain areas, just starting to outline it, make it look even more like a graphic image could be interesting to experiment with outlining certain areas, maybe adding more detail to the hair here, outlining the nose. So that's definitely something that you can try too to see how that looks, is going around and again just outlining certain areas of the face, just like what we did with the sketchy outline if you did that practice. Here's more of the outline, which definitely is a bit bold, but if you decide to play around with that, try taking the opacity down and using it almost more as a texture or some sort of kind of layer that you're able to blend and see really more brush strokes and make it look a little more interesting. You can also try some of these different blending modes and see how that looks blending in your image. But go ahead and try this out if you haven't already. Remember, if you mess up and need to go back, to hit Command, Option, and Z to undo and go back.